Jiu-jitsu is not the answer for cops. The job isn't always trying to wrestle a guy on the ground. As a matter of fact, sometimes going to the ground is the worst thing you could possibly do.
Hello, friends. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Mayn Idea Podcast, where today I have the pleasure of sitting down with Chris Haueter. If you love this podcast and you want to support it, please take 30 seconds, leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. This helps the show get discovered organically and helps me continue to bring on amazing guests like Chris. The other way you can support this show is by sharing an episode with someone who loves jiu-jitsu. Bring them into the community, let them listen and learn from some of the greatest minds in the gentle art. Also, there are now timestamps in the show notes, so feel free to jump around to the part that interests you most, although I always recommend listening to the episode in its entirety. Chris Haueter is a 6th degree jiu-jitsu black belt and member of the Dirty Dozen, which is the first 12 non-Brazilians to earn jiu-jitsu black belts. He has a masterful approach to jiu-jitsu that is anchored around his 3 principles: think street, train the sport, and practice the art. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Without further ado, Chris Haueter. Well, Chris, it is an absolute pleasure. I have done a little bit extra homework, I feel like, for this episode to try my best to avoid redundancies, because you have been on a lot of podcasts, and I feel like when that happens, it's very easy to ask the same questions and hear the same story. So I want to say thank you for taking the time, carving it out of your schedule, being here in the first place, but I am stoked to talk to you.
I'm stoked that I'm here. I will say that technically you're kind of cutting in and out, but I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, we should. It's technical error, but on our end, it's good. So we'll be able to get the clear thing on the end here.
Good, good.
So to start, I actually am very curious how you got into ventriloquism.
Oh God, that's so as a kid, like so many kids, right? I was fascinated by magic, card tricks, sleight of hand tricks, ventriloquism, half scared of it, half fascinated by it. And I really am not that into it at all. Like I wish I was into it more. Sometimes that's one of those things in my life, like playing drums, ventriloquy, a few other areas that I wish I had spent more time in. Like I almost wish I'd spent more time in those than grappling. It's like, but you know how life works. It always works that way.
Yeah, that skill set seems so unique to me, because when you see someone do it, it looks as though it should be easy, but you find out very quickly
it's really
if you
hard,
just try
and
it,
I
it's
am
hard.
not good at it. P's, B's, there's some that like are impossible, and you spend your time trying to reword or rewrite the script so you don't hit those hard letters. And what's interesting is I'm a stutterer, and it was kind of one of those things that sort of made me want to learn it, to like, because that's one of the things, it's a tool, a technique to learn how to not stutter, is ventriloquy. And so yeah, it's a way of speaking and changing. Instead of saying B, you're basically saying T, but you're saying it in a B way. But believe me, for anyone who's out there who's a stutter, that will not solve your problem. I can guarantee you, it might even make it worse. But yeah, so
it's fine. I mean, it's so easy to draw parallels to jiu-jitsu and grappling, and sometimes I hate to do it, but
yeah,
on paper, you see someone doing or playing jiu-jitsu, and it seems very simple.
yes.
Oh, they're just rolling around in pajamas. That's so stupid. What? Or just completely not understand it, right? That's a common sentiment too, is to see it and go, I don't get what that is. Ventriloquy, the same thing. It's almost like an optical illusion. You don't understand what you're seeing when you do it.
Yes.
And then when you try it for the first time, you learn so fast that you have no idea what you're doing at all. And
Yes.
all of a sudden, it seems like smoke and mirrors and snake oil and this crazy thing that these people have dedicated their life to learn how to do. When you look at those two things at grapple arts, jujitsu, whatever you want to call it, and kind of like peak ventriloquy or that ability, what fascinates you about those two things?
Well, you know, it's interesting. So it doesn't happen to me a lot anymore, but like last night, I had the young athletic white belt's first class. And of course, he wanted to roll
Yeah.
as well. And it's interesting because I have been writing essays for my book. And one of them is, and I've said this for years, it's easier for a black belt to roll with a blue belt than the young, athletic, completely untrained white belt. Because what they do is so unorthodox and so out of the norm. They're crazy back arching, bending moves. They twist out of arm bars that a jiu-jitsu guy would tap and know I'm in it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so it is one of those things where you don't realize how hard things are until you jump into it, right? And then you
Yeah.
realize it's layered. And obviously, over the last couple of years, via social media and the internet, we all are now familiar with confirmation biases, the Dunning Kruger effect, where it's been basically shown that when people get a little bit of knowledge, that they think their knowledge exceeds that of the norm, and until you get a lot of knowledge, do you realize how little you know.
Yeah.
So, like, one of my favorite books of 2016 was The Death of Expertise by Tom Nichols. And it basically, and part of it is the internet age and all that, but it opens up with, in polls, when you have people who have these really strong opinions on the Iraq war, either for
Mhm.
or against, and how few of them could even identify Iraq on a map. How few of them
Yeah.
even knew what the different religions were.
Yep.
Sunni, Shiite, they just were absolutely clueless. Yet they have these really strong opinions on whether we should be there or shouldn't. And it's so human of us to get a little bit of knowledge, maybe hear one podcast on it, or read half of an article and three headlines and think we understand an issue when it's
Yeah.
so much more complex. And
It
obviously,
is.
you know, the grappling arts are an example of that complexity.
Yep. It's really, really weird that you just mentioned the Iraq war because I don't know what it has been. Maybe it was because this podcast was going to happen in the future. And so subconsciously I was preparing for it. But I've been on this kick of watching and listening to and reading about Operation Desert Shield, Operation Desert Storm, the war in Iraq. And it's so funny that you mentioned exactly what you mentioned because when I first started, I was listening to this podcast series on it, and it starts pre-war all the way up through to post-war, right?
Yeah.
And I was sitting there, I was listening to it, and I'm like thinking back in my head, right? Like I'm just born 1989,
Wow.
this stuff's starting to go on, and I go, wow, I'm like, Iraq, Iran, what's geographically, where is this? And that's so embarrassing for me to say, especially on a show, right? But
Right.
I think back to high school where in geography class, I could ace a quiz, right? Where you memorize where the spots are, and you pass the test and you forget about it. But to actually conceptualize geographically where this stuff is, I had to pull up a map and actually
Yeah.
understand the areas and the zones and the things that I was understanding. And it dawned on me that I'm like, man, how many other things in my life, just on an individual level, am I doing that on? And then
And
on a cultural level, how
yes,
many people are doing that for other things completely, whether it's jujitsu, war, history,
yes.
politics?
I think that's awesome. I love when I meet anybody, regardless of ideological stripe or anything, when they catch that humility,
Yes.
that learning bug, right? Where
Yep.
like, I want to find out more, and it generally not. I have an opinion and I want to go search facts to support my opinion so I can win arguments. Not that
Totally.
mindset. That absolutely, wow, I don't know shit about this, and I'm going to do some research. One of the things I loved about this book, The Death of Expertise, it's like a perfect example. And I don't care whether you're pro-vax, anti-vax, or any of that. But like the internet, beginning with WebMD and a few other things, suddenly not only exposed that the medical establishment isn't quite as expert as they claim, but also it suddenly made people who couldn't pass a high school biology class into pseudo medical experts. So both of these things are parallel happening, and the COVID hits, and I've had the college inorganic chem, organic chem, pathophysiology, microbiology, biochemistry. Like I've had these, but I've had them 30 years ago. I've had just enough to know that I don't really know shit.
Yeah.
Right? And so if I hear a guy who's drawing organic the chemistry equations on the board, I have enough to understand sort of what he's doing, but I don't have enough to understand when he says that the carboxyl group is not going to join with the OH group. I don't know if he's lying or not. I have to. There's so it's almost like opened up this world to all of us. It's like imagine the kid like last night, this new white belt, who I could tell he kind of knew what an armbar was, a guard, and a mount. Where did he learn it? From playing UFC game on Nintendo. But I mean, he genuinely did know some stuff, right? And it's fascinating because back when I began, like I remember 1992, I could throw 20 bucks on the ground. Maybe I'm with some Rangers, Green Berets, SEALs, and I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I could make them a tap within a minute. And I remember when that shift happened, where suddenly even kids intuitively understood what an armbar was and a guard. It had gotten into the zeitgeist of culture. And before then, it just wasn't there. The guys would just stick their arms out like a gift.
Yeah.
And it was
And
so
you'd
easy.
wrap that thing up.
Yep. And there was a period of time, I want to say it was mid to late 90s, where suddenly not only me, but the Gracies, Machados, and all that could no longer line up a room and have 40 guys come in, and each of them, in basically a minute or two, you would sub an entire room, including Hapkido black belts, a couple judo black belts, wrestlers. But then what they call is the 100th monkey phenomenon, where suddenly something that is isolated within a small group spreads rapidly to other groups. And suddenly it becomes global, like almost overnight. And it was a fascinating period of the jiu-jitsu that I think people really, even us older guys, forget there was this period of time where this jiu-jitsu technology, this knowledge was so rare that I could be in a state of North Carolina or whatever, and I'm a purple belt and know that I'm the highest ranked guy in this art in this entire state.
Right.
It was a strange period of time.
Do you think when you reflect back on that time, or even consider your life today, do you feel like things are headed in a better direction? I mean, it almost sounds like in that example, athleticism and availability to pretty much anyone has really changed the pace of this thing, so that you can have
Absolutely.
someone who has heard about it in the UFC, or they've seen a class, but they really have no personal ties to it. Is that good for jujitsu and grappling as a whole? Would you say, having been around and actually seen this whole thing blossom and become what it is?
Well, to put it in the Taoist view or the Hegelian view, which is basically how I try to evaluate things, is all things have a good and a bad. So in some ways, UFC and the explosion of reality martial arts popularity was the best thing that ever happened to the jiu-jitsu and the worst thing that ever happened. It all depends on what perspective you are looking at it from. And I'm a firm believer, not only while I'm grappling, but in life, to always try to put myself in the other person's shoes, whether it's my opponent, my student, whatever, to try to really experience it, which you realize you can't ever completely do, which is even
Right.
humbling again. How we assume we know how person X thinks. And then we find out, just like everything else, it's boxes and boxes. And we can get closer to truth, but we never really hit truth. Not in a mathematical way of 1 + 1 = 2. We've hit a truth. And then even that, when you start going into other dimensions, you realize even that's not true. That's a perspective of the second dimension viewed from the third.
Right.
And when you start, to me, my goal for martial arts was never how it ended up. It was never my plan to have it end up how it ended up. And we all have expectations and plans. And expectations are the breeding ground for resentment, disappointment. So when guys expect jujitsu is going to flow in this way, they're having an ideal of where they think it ought to go. And it's never going to meet your idealistic expectations. Nothing does. We're kind of like the kids who you're going to take your first trip to Disneyland. Oh my God. If you build it up too much, you're going to be let down.
Yeah. When when you think about the world today, I pose this question to you because Chris Burns and I talked about it briefly, and I thought that he had some really interesting perspectives on it. But if we're to just zoom out a little bit on violence in general
Yes.
and speak a little bit to what you talked about with this skill set, like the technology of jujitsu, I find that really interesting because when you guys were in Horian's garage and you're learning this thing and it's brought up from Brazil and you really did have a tool that other people didn't have. It was a time when it wasn't widespread. And so, like you said, you could be in a room with 40 people on the wall, and the likelihood that you control the situation, control the distance, control the clench, and dominate that 99%, right?
Yep.
Now we're in a time where, if we're being honest, that's not the case anymore because
No,
martial
it's
arts is so
absolutely
much
not.
more widespread. So when you think about violence as a thing, what is important to know as an individual and how to handle any kind of situation where you come into a self-defense situation, an altercation, when you sense that that might be developing? Like, what are your principles around that?
So let me bring you to a period of time in which I'm a new black belt and a new cop. And
Mhm.
this is back before there were a lot of jiu-jitsu black belts. We had a couple of purple belts who were cops and a few others. And it
Was
was
this in
before,
Redondo?
no, in Culver City. And it was
Okay.
before social media, before the smartphone.
Yep.
And videos were just starting to come out that we would watch of inmates, prisoners, practicing prison style self defense, prison style hand to hand combat. And it was when law enforcement was just starting to dawn on them that, hey, these UFC skills are going to start trickling down into the bad guys that we have to arrest.
Mhm.
And it's almost like one of those things where when YouTube was first starting to really blow up, when you could first upload fairly high res the film, there was this period of time where guys who were firearms instructors, but tactics instructors, in order to make money and some pride and some coolness would put out their skills online. Here's how you change a magazine. Here's how all this. You know who was watching those?
Criminals.
ISIS.
Yeah, yeah.
ISIS. They're studying because we were just volunteering up our best skills. It's kind of like how when you think of the Cold War, which you're young, like I lived through it, how every weapon that we have, the quote unquote bad guy, Russia and or China, has a parallel weapon, sometimes stolen from our direct plans. I can't remember our B-29, or was it the one of our bombers in like 1959? All of a sudden, Russia had made one, a fleet of them that were almost the exact plane because they had acquired the plans through stolen information, classified information, leaked through the private industry, through whether it was Northrop, Boeing, Grumman, somebody leaked it. And because that's what happens with all violent technology, is the knowledge eventually gets out. Even if it's guys studying, watching over and over again in slow-mo, frame by frame, how did that world champion pull that move off in this last competition? People are studying and analyzing it. So we really are in this amazing age, and wait until AI starts analyzing and spitting out exactly what the human needs, but to understand about that particular sweep or whatever it is.
Right, right.
We're in a fascinating revolutionary period in the exponential explosion of information, also misinformation.
Right.
There's so much info in your phone. Your Nokia flip phone had more computing power than the computer that controlled the 1969 Apollo moon project. And what we are, Moore's law says every X amount of time, our information calculation ability doubles and doubles. That's why every 2 years, your computer comes out and it's twice as fast as the one that you had that was state of the art just 2 years ago. It's
Just
amazing.
to reel us back in, I think the connection there, what you're bringing up, is that in these instances of self defense, right?
Yes.
Is that because the information is available, because the videos are on YouTube, because the tactics are uploaded on social media, and black belts and professors are doing how tos and tutorials and breakdowns, that the criminal minded will adopt these practices, become more skilled at them, and that
Absolutely.
presents, whether it's a law enforcement, a military, or any kind of service member, presents a increased challenge for them, in that maybe a tactic that you would use that's a control tactic in a routine traffic stop or something now no longer works because the defense is understood.
Yes. And that's kind of one of the reasons why in law enforcement, we hate the word routine. Because routine,
Like routine traffic
right,
stop. Yeah,
it
because
implies,
there's no such thing.
right, a
Right.
controllability that is never there. And it's almost like when you're rolling with the blue belt. His moves are going to be definitely more predictable than the white belt who's had no experience. But at the same time, you can't get yourself into a mindset where you think you can predict the outcome. And that's
In any case, yeah.
in any case. And one of the beauties of the combat sports, all of them, is it really does bring you into the now, where
Yeah.
you're not planning how your last move in the role. You're existing within the moment of now, adjusting constantly, action, reaction, and adjustment, and finding what is the essence of, with jiu-jitsu at least, is how do I control and submit my opponent, utilizing the least amount of athletics. and the maximum amount of leverage, knowledge, cunningness, and guile. That's the art. But then the sport is, how do I take my art, all my knowledge, backed up with all my athletics to win in the objective of the game, whether the game is an IBJJF competition, UFC, or in an alley in the street. What it is that? Because all too often, the art slash self-defense street guy starts to poo-poo sport because of the rules and all this stuff. I get that. But what they miss by not doing the sport is that real resistance, real timing against real skill, against
Right.
equal skills. That's what you miss. So, and you don't necessarily have to do IBJJF or Abu Dhabi or Bill's backyard grapple off, but you do have to roll. You can't not test this against your peers.
And there's a big difference in the pace of, like, having competed and having trained. You can have hard training, but
Yep.
I will stand by the fact that when you are in a tournament, the pace is different, and
Way
the
different.
intensity of your coaches and the volume of the
Yes.
arena and everything, that does mimic more the stressfulness of a
Yes.
situation in which you're dealing with that.
100%. Yep.
You go back from a competition to training, and it just feels like everything's like slowed down.
Yes, it feels slow down and soft. And when you add real strikes in like MMA, and you go back to grappling rules only, it's like you're like, God, how was I ever scared of grappling?
So this brings up an interesting point. It's very unique to you because of your experience with law enforcement. I think about this all the time. I had an uncle of mine was a motorcycle cop in Los Angeles for 15 years,
Okay. Yep.
and I would, he's the kind of guy that will not sit with his back to a door. Like, he's very
Yep.
hardwired
I know that
into.
mindset. Yep.
Yep. And now, having done jujitsu for 5+ years, and I've met a lot of police officers and firemen, service members, people at Camp Pendleton, I realize how little a lot of law enforcement officers know,
Yes.
and how unskilled they are in this moment of controlled, trusted training, right? Like,
Yes.
I know you, you're my
Yes.
partner, we slap hands. If something goes wrong, I'm going to stop, you're going to stop, right? That's a very unique and friendly environment.
That's
when
a
you really think about
very
it.
unique. And it is absolutely amazing that I've taught classes and I've been chuckling inside of my own head, realizing that two of my cop pals are rolling with an ex-con and a guy who
Yeah.
used to be affiliated with a gang.
Yeah.
And on the mat, we're all friends.
That's the best part. That is the best part about it. It's something that I think about on a weekly basis, because you meet, I mean, you do this long enough in enough places, and I can't even speak to that in comparison to you, but like, you meet all walks of life.
All
And it's
walks of
this
life. Yes.
even playing field where it's that, what did you refer to it as earlier? The nowness of it.
Yes.
Like, you are only in it doing what you're doing when you're doing it. And that
Yep.
negates this, I don't care what you think.
Right.
Right? I don't. We're here to train.
I mean,
But
yep. I've had several private roles with multi-billionaires, but on the mat, we're rolling, and it's
two guys in
that
pajamas.
is it. And I've rolled with guys and trained and taught guys from all walks of life in America, Europe, Asia, Australia, Africa. And in these things, I've met such a wide range of characters and personality types, ideological leanings, everything. And because I'm approaching it as a Taoist, as a Hegelian Western Taoist, I genuinely, and people say this, but they often don't mean it, I genuinely strive to see the good and bad in everything. The assets,
like
liability,
stoic recognition.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that has been my journey for the last 20 years. And I'm ever humbled again in realizing how little I know of this thing or this person, this whatever it is that I thought I knew, right?
Yeah. When you were on the police force, what did it feel like to have the skill set you knew you had that you were developing over these years on the mats, being a mat rat, being in there all the time, rain or shine, and being next to a team member or another police officer who you knew didn't possess the same skill set, yet you're to rely on each other?
Well, a couple things. And again, we're going to look at this from the two perspectives.
Yes.
Jiu-jitsu is not the answer for cops. The job isn't always trying to wrestle a guy on the ground. As a matter of fact, sometimes going to the ground is the worst thing you could possibly do as a police officer. And when I would teach, and I still, when I teach law enforcement, and they're almost all aware of this, the beauty of being a good grappler is your ability to choose whether it goes onto the ground or not.
Mm.
So it's far harder to take down a good grappler who doesn't want to go on the ground. That's the hardest guy to bring on the ground, is a guy who has judo skills, Greco skills, wrestling skills, the jiu-jitsu skills, who says, no, I'm not going on the ground. I used to, like, in this period of time, like, I have three of my black belts are cops and are nearing retirement now. And all of them on their first class, I bring them in the garage, I hand them a pair of cuffs, and I go, look, I'm going to pretend that I'm a drunk guy who doesn't want to be handcuffed. Go ahead and cuff me. And they'd try all this, and I'd, just like, oh, fuck you. And I'd use, and they realize how hard it is when a person has some skill and is
And
saying, I don't want to be,
those are trained people.
yeah, that, nope, I ain't going down. And
Yeah.
one of them, I even kind of let him sort of bring me down, so I ended up on top and I handcuffed him. Still pretending I'm a drunk, right?
Right, right.
Now, I don't give myself this credit. I give this credit to the art, right?
Right.
And too often, martial artists start taking the credit for the art.
Mm.
And that's a mistake as well. Is we are the vessels carrying an art. It's not that Chris Haueter's cool and that cop tried to bring him on the ground and he handcuffed him. It's that the art did this. And my job as a coach is not to show you Chris Haueter's style, not to show you how cool I am, which permeates our industry, the hierarchy.
Yeah.
We come in, we bow, we talk about how great this guy is, and try to get closer to greatness and all that. That's very common in our industry because the structure of it, of martial arts, is the pyramid structure of the hierarchy. So I try to, knowing I'm existing within this structure, I try to really get out of it and not, because the worst thing for me is to start thinking, I know what I'm doing now. That leads me
Yeah.
down a path of what I'm going to call ignorance. I have to stay humble and always be a student and always realize that I just know a little bit more now. And everything I learn reveals two things I don't know. Then I learned that one. There's now two more things I don't know. Instead of approaching it, oh, I know that now. Now I can escape out of that position whenever. But like that's the mindset that brings you to the end of a box where you've trapped yourself.
You said, I really like this quote. You said, reflect when you're presenting a black belt or a stripe to someone. You said, reflect on it, especially that day,
Yes.
and pretend that you're brand new again and relearn what you think you already know. And I thought about that for a while, and I was like, it is kind of profound. When you start training jujitsu, if you enjoy it and you like it and you kind of see yourself doing it longer, the idea of getting this black belt is this thing. It's this moment, right, in the future that's like the goal for whatever reason. But that's really when it start. That's kind of like black belt. Kind of means like you've done the training.
Right. It's
Now
almost
you're
like,
at zero.
yes, if this is ever going to become an Olympic sport, which if that happens, it will happen because Americans make it a high school sport, then a college sport, and then it'll end
Right.
up in the Olympics.
Yeah.
But if it ever does, there isn't going to be an Olympic purple belt world champion. It's black
There'll
belt.
only be like ADCC.
Yes. What
Well, I guess
matters is black belt.
sometimes, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, promoters don't like that idea because that's
Right.
3/4 of their money out the fucking door. Because like back when I was new in this, white belts didn't compete. You're not ready. When you're a white belt, you aren't ready. It was like when you're ready to roll, you're a blue belt. So what it's done is it's made white belts take forever to get through, and it's kind of pushed back all other rank in a weirder way. Because again, if this ever does become an Olympic sport, people will get their black belts quicker than they do now. Some people might say that's bad, that it should be 10 solid years until. But the fact is, if you begin when you're 25, in 10 years, you're kind of chronologically over the hill. But to be an Olympic athlete, it means you have to start when you're a kid.
Right.
And which now is possible, right? Let's say.
Yeah, I think it's growing in the United. You're
Yes.
like you see the Ruotolo brothers, like they're kind of the first, or Cole Abate, the first generation of people that have been training since they were children, are now getting up there, and that what that will do is younger kids will see them and go, I want to be like that. Those guys are cool.
That's right.
They'll start training when they're younger. More kids classes, you raise the tides,
That's
all
right.
the ships go up. I can see it happening that way.
And there's something to be said for mat time, for just time on the mat. It's like one of the things. So when I was a brown belt and a new black belt, it was not uncommon that I would show up on the Machado mat, and there would be 3 to 8 Brazilians coming out of their sleeping bags who just flown over, who are bringing the coolest new stuff. And like I learned so much, and it was in that mid 90s period of what I call the Cambrian explosion of jiu-jitsu, where suddenly jiu-jitsu was global. And the evolution of the guard, the evolution of the open guard, spider guard, daily Eva guard, like all this was new. And it was just blowing up. And one of the things that would piss me off is when somebody, my peer, brown or a black belt, didn't want to roll with me. You know, I'd go, hey, do you want to roll? Oh, no, my wind right now, I'm just on an airplane. And all of a sudden they're rolling with one of the purple belts hard. And it's like, that's fucking, they don't want to roll with me because they don't want to risk losing, dodging. So I kind of made up my mind that I would never dodge. That even when I'm older, I'll give the younger guys a crack at me and all that. And I remember the period of time, my late 30s, early 40s, when I started not being able to hold my own against my younger peers, right? Because in that athletic environment, I might have more knowledge and skill, but when you're in that fast-paced boom, 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 it's a different game. And so, and what I would do is because I would travel around so much and teach, because I didn't really have a school, I'm a traveling jiu-jitsu Johnny seed spreader. I would always make sure in the early days that I would roll with almost everybody. Then as I got a little older, I'd make sure I rolled with the upper belts. Then when I got a little older, I'd make sure I rolled with at least the host, the guy who brought me in, who's dying to roll with me, because that's really where the essence of the game lies. It's not in showing moves, it's in rolling. And it's like when I get my chances to roll with Rickson, these little brief periods of time. Rickson's much older. He's broken up. I mean, I'm old and broken up, but he's got 10 years on me. That is where I really learn the magic, is when we're working one little position. I already know step A is this, step B is that, step C. But there's the nuances in between. There's the connection and feel. And that's where the magic lies. And again, in this art that you are looking for, the knowledge, the leverage, instead of the athletics and the speed, that's where you find limitless growth.
Right.
But you have to, quote unquote, know the moves well enough to even feel and get that growth.
Can you talk to me a little bit about this, because you're in a unique position where, one, you get exposure to Rickson, two, you've watched him age, three, you're aging, and four, neither of you guys are pushovers. But there's this thing in jiu-jitsu where time is undefeated, right? There's going to
That's
be a
right.
moment where it doesn't matter if you're the most striped up degree black belt in the
It
world. If
means
you're
nothing. Yes.
so
At a
how, but
certain point,
how do you, being the type of person that Chris Haueter is, your mentality that kept you on the mats every single day, that got you through law enforcement as a career, that continues to train and teach and educate people, how do you accept that? Because that's something I struggle with. Even I'm 34, but like being 34 and working out 4 days a week feels different than being 25. And my
it
dad's
does. So
59, and we talk about this weekly. It's hard to swallow that pill. How do you do it?
my dad used to say, who was an athlete too and a coach, that that no one knows the pain of an aging athlete. And when you're young, you think they're meaning physical pain. But no, the pain of an aging athlete is the pain of having a brain with the knowledge and the body that can't carry it out.
Yes, exactly what I'm
And
passionate about.
like I wasn't a cop real long, but long enough. Like I was cop, military, a few other things that they weren't my careers. My career is basically a jiu-jitsu instructor. It
Right.
wasn't my goal, partially because I knew growing up from hearing the wisdom of my dad, who was a coach and all that, that the athletic window is short. It's
Mm-hmm.
5 to 10 years. There's basically for the male competitive athlete, you have 5 years where you could get yourself to the top. And you've got to be young to be able to do it, but old enough to have enough skill and experience. It's these two windows that barely roll along, and you find you're in that pocket where I'm 28, I'm a brown belt. If I push through right now, I could do the world championship thing. But once
Right.
that window passes, it's over. And you could fight to cling on, but ultimately there's a brief window in time. And if this thing is only about that, how fucking depressing. It's got to be about
Super
more.
depressing,
Yeah,
right? I mean, we see that with athletes all the time. Is
all the time.
they win an Olympic medal and then their identity goes away in
Yeah,
between the Olympic years, and it becomes hard to be themselves, and they
yes,
suffer serious depression, in some cases
serious.
suicide, and that is
Because,
a
yeah,
real deal.
and that thrill, like, I never accomplished anything real huge. I mean, I had my moments of glory. I was the first black belt match that the Americans' hand was raised. Like I won the first black belt match. That might seem huge, but in a way it's not, right? In a way, compared to now, the Americans like Isaac Doderline and all these guys like
Right.
that are really accomplishing goals in the sport of this thing, right? I laid some of the foundational work. I inspired other Americans that say, "Oh my God, did you see that Chris Haueter guy with the dyed blonde hair beat those two Brazilians? That's amazing. I'm inspired now." Whatever it was, right? And I mean, that's my little, like, I have a few little moments of fame where I won super fights. I lost the 0-0 fight, even though the whole crowd was chanting USA and boo because they knew I won. I lost to the 2 years ago Brazilian world champion at that time. It was a super fight, and I've had my moments of wow, I'm at the high level of this thing now. But that window was brief and it was short because I was in my mid 30s at that time, and when I'm in the right zone, I could roll like I'm 25. But afterwards, I'm fucking injured, sore, and on the couch. And
Yeah.
that's the mid 30s. Your 40s come, that's like I can distinctly recall because I'd frequently overhear somebody like behind me in the mat going, God, that guy's fast. And it would usually be me. And I realized it wasn't me anymore who they were talking about.
So
That
speed left
my
first.
speed left in my 40s, where I wasn't the fastest guy. I was still fast, but
Right.
compared to my age and peers, but the younger guys were faster. They were more supple.
Yeah.
But then that's when your old man strength comes in. So your 40s are when you really start feeling the old man strength. And it's a real phenomenon. And so you're making up for your lack of that fluidity and speed with strength and a calmness that come through till you turn 50. Then it fucking all starts going away. So that's when it starts to get more like depressing. My
And
40s felt great.
I would imagine you're through all this, right? Just to help paint this picture for people, you're someone who's cared about your health, cared about what you eat, cared about how you take care of your body, in addition to doing grappling arts, correct?
Relatively speaking, my wife, who's super healthy, would argue that I don't. But certainly
Okay.
compared to my peers, I probably am slightly healthier than most of them. And most pro athletes, the dark secret in sports is most athletes are utilizing a supplement.
Yeah. I
And
know. I talked to, I actually talked very openly to Wagner Rocha about this because of his steroid pops. And he said, look, man, he's like, I'm trying to compete in ADCC and I'm in my 40s. They don't test for it. So, like, what do you want me to do? You
see,
know?
and here's the thing, humans will always push the boundaries of rules and will only stop cheating when they are caught. The only thing that prevents, that's why we create in sports rules. Because if we don't have rules,
People
everybody
will
will
cheat.
cheat.
Yeah.
And we have to have these rules. And this is the small c conservative argument for rules and structure and order and institution. And we don't want to veer off into politics, but you can always tell a culture is going into dangerous times when the quote unquote conservatives are breaking the rules and the quote unquote progressives are trying to protect institution. You're in trouble because it's healthier to have the liberal progressive trying to break the rules, push the boundaries, try new culture, new music, new ideas, and let the conservative run it through the institution, say, we'll slowly adapt a little bit of these rules, but not. When that reverses, that's historically you're heading towards dark times. But let's get out of that because I don't want to. Yeah, turn that card because I
We e braked.
yes, I can always tell when I always when I give a speech, I insult somebody on the far right and somebody on the far left, which is my guide to know I'm probably going down the middle.
Yeah.
But so back to the sports and athletics. So humans are going to cheat, and it's the abuser of the rules who gets caught. It's the abuser of the steroids who gets caught, not the user. Because most of the time it's acquired through a medical prescription, through all the proper routes, the anti-aging thing, testosterone replacement, human growth hormone replacement, other things that is done legally. That's how a pro athlete can sprain his ankle and in a month he's back in the game
Right.
because of modern medical science. And I have no opinion on whether it ought to be legal or not. It's too nuanced. It's way too
Yeah.
complicated. And so, yeah, we're in this strange age. And the reason why I don't use those substances is because your body has to produce its own testosterone, its own human growth hormone. If you are supplementing that, you become dependent on that shot every week. And then if suddenly the zombie apocalypse happens and you can no longer acquire it, you're fucked, because your body can no longer naturally make its own growth hormone, testosterone, other hormones that we barely understand that interact when you play, and you will shrivel up and die old within 6 months.
How much temptation is there for you, like when you're training nowadays? I'm gonna move you over a little bit to
Yeah.
your left, just slightly, little over to your left. Yeah, perfect. Uh, how much temptation is there for you to maintain that tenacity, to be like, oh man, if I could just Chris Haueter in the 30s, and I'm leading a group today, and I know there's some killers in here, and I really want to push a roll. Do you ever feel tempted
Yeah.
to
Here's
take
how
growth
now.
hormone or something like that?
Here's now how I do it. And I think of my various mentors: Rigan Machado, Nelson Montero, Rickson, Jean-Jacques Machado. These are like my mentors in this. Rigan's a year younger than me. Jean-Jacques 2 years younger than me, I think, or 3. Rickson's a little older than me. And so when I turned 50, I was debating competing in Masters again, but I fucking resented the rules. I resented old guys doing a 5-minute match. Like, I can't even warm up in 5 minutes. It's forcing old guys to fucking sprint isn't healthy. I had a resentment at that. I had all these things. And Rickson and I had lunch, and I was starting to complain about my resentment in IBJJF, and basically he co-signed it, as did Rigan. Fuck IBJJF, fuck their rules, all that, right? And it kind of gave me a new window and a new path. And my new path, which I've always had my rules of threes, where I break things apart in threes. You think street, you train the sport, you practice the art. That's the balance. And you think street because that's what keeps this thing honest. You always have in the forethought of your mind, will this work in a street altercation? Will this work in a life or death altercation? That's why we think street. We train the sport because we got to be practical. We have to make some rules, no eye gouging, groin punching, whatever it is, so we can train as realistically as we can within some man-made rules of the game. And then through that develops all these sports. The Greco rules, the Judo rules, wrestling collegiate rules, freestyle rules, IBJJF rules, Abu Dhabi rules. All these are subsets of sports which are human engineered ways to control an environment to get a certain result. Just like how evolution works, except instead of natural selection over millions of years, we're doing artificial selection over half a generation. And certain parameters of rules will select for certain types of athletes.
Right.
And each of these combat sports has that aspect. And again, this is a whole aspect, a whole wing of this thing in my triangle that you will miss if you never do any sport. Then you have the art. The art is where you do research, the development, you explore. And you can almost say the art is the liberal, the think street is the conservative, the trained sport is the practical thing of them both, right? It's an attempt to blend this. And obviously, not all analogies fit 100%, but ultimately, that's what we're doing. The art enables you to risk. It enables you to try things that you would never try in a competition match. You literally do your best to not use speed and strength, so you could develop and grow. But you always got to think street, because if you remove that part, if you take the conservative away, then your art starts to become flaky, bullshitty, fucking silat-y, kung fu-y, right? You lose reality. And if you just have street and art and no sport, you will lose reality thinking you are doing reality. So you need that sport to temper it. And again, when I say sport, I don't necessarily mean a sanctioned organization.
Right.
I
You can
mean,
mean a roll, a
I can
timed
mean a
roll.
roll, right? We
Yeah.
got to
Yeah.
test this thing. This is the lab. Let's test it. I just learned this cool arm bar. Let's test it. Go ahead and resist 100%. We got to do that, right? And so as I've aged, I generally made up a rule when I turned about 55. It was 50. I had this big lunch meeting with Rickson, started to re engineer my plan. I'm 58 and a half now. Basically, the last 8 years, I've been approaching my roles a whole different way. I'm
Mm.
approaching it from a point of how relaxed can I accomplish my goal? Now, will I occasionally have athletic bursts? Yes,
Mm.
occasionally, but they're becoming less and less frequent. And I even have a rule I made up that I'm rolling with purples, the blue belts, that I cannot use any speed or strength. So I'm almost rolling like at the speed of a sloth.
Purposefully, with intention.
Purposefully, yeah.
Yeah.
And there will be times where they'll catch my back or whatever that I know in my mind, had I scrambled, I would have
Never. Right.
stopped that. But I'm not gonna. Because what it's done is it opens up all these growth, new pathways. How do I prevent this without using athletics? How do I pull off this back control to a sub if I'm not wrenching the face? Right? All these things where to force technical growth. And it's been wonderful. And occasionally, when I roll with a peer, a black belt around my age or weight, sure, I'm
Right.
going to add athletics.
What
I'm
have
going to
you?
roll.
I think that that's a beautiful approach. What have you learned from adopting that?
Well, what I've learned is like right now I'm 58, right? I if I roll, I usually like last night in my class, I had 5 rolls after my class. 2 of them were black belts. One of them I rolled fairly athletically because he's around my weight class. The other one's a heavyweight. I tried to be as technical as I could, but I've got maybe 3. Let's say I've got 5 good rolls per week, per
Mm-hmm.
day, and then 5 of those per week. So I have 25 rolls a week. There are 50 weeks in the year in which I can roll, right?
Yep.
So when you start adding up with the math, I realize I don't really have a lot of rolls left in me. There's
You
a
mean in total, like
in
in life?
total, there's a
Yeah. Wow.
limited
Yeah. Yeah.
number of rolls left that are going to get harder and harder. So I've become very choosy when I roll in a competitive way. I'm very choosy now because I'm not going to waste it on the 24-year-old CrossFit purple belt heavyweight. I'm not going to waste that. And I was telling Rickson the other month, and he laughed. It's like when you spot the old lion walking on the plains, where you can tell he's got a limp and all this shit. Why aren't the young guys fucking with the old lion? Because they all know he's got one good roll left, just one.
uh,
But
that's all
like,
you
I'm
need, right?
pretty sure that I could spike my adrenaline and have one roll where I'm 25 left. For 8 to 10 minutes, I can roll like I'm 25 years old. And after that, I'm done.
Well, you know what? If you go back to your triangle, think street. You want that one in the chamber.
Yes, you want to keep that one in the chamber. Precisely.
And that's
Precisely.
why it's important to know those points, because without them, you're not in reality, right? If you forget
That's
to think
correct.
straight, you let your ego get involved. Now you start rolling harder, and now those however many rolls in the rest of your life shorten
Yep.
substantially, and then you get injured. It's
Then you get
actually
injured.
I
And those,
love principles that are
yep.
like
And
macro in view, but very simple when you think
yes,
about them.
me too. Because I should say me, we really are dumb. We aren't as smart as we fucking think. If you think about, so I often say that the simplest martial art is boxing. Jab, cross hook, slip, bob, weave, uppercut, footwork. I could teach you everything you need to know in a weekend clinic. And you will spend the rest of your life trying to master the art of boxing.
Right.
It's simple. It's kind of like doing an arithmetic test without a calculator as fast as you fucking can. Then there's wrestling. Wrestling is like an algebra test without a calculator. Your arithmetic skills have to be good, but you've got to understand a little bit more complex math. Then you have Jiu Jitsu, which is like a calculus test. And the gi slows it down, so you have a calculator.
Right.
But there's no way you can, like most of us, will never remember every formula.
Yeah.
We're going to have to go do some research and go, what's the formula again of the integral of a whatever? You know, you're going to be looking things up. Because, like, how often is it where I'm someplace, maybe I just taught a clinic, some purple belt comes over and goes, hey, let me show you this move I've been doing. I'll watch it and I'll go, fuck, I used to do that all the time. Why don't I, like, I remember going through a phase where that was one of my favorite moves. I used to even teach it. Now I don't even teach it. Like, it'll be because our brains cannot fit all the information in our heads, because jiu-jitsu and judo, for that matter, are these complex arts. So what we're trying to do is simplify them into an effective, usable, i.e. sport and street, a strategy. There's the art where, yeah, we're learning all these things. Then the balancing is keeping it, like I always say with my rule of threes, is that you want to have three options in every major position. Three options from the closed guard, three options from the open guard, three chokes, three arm bars, three sweeps, three ways of opening with the guard, the passing routes, over, under, around, and through. There's three overs, three under, three around, three through. So I keep everything in a basic, simplistic things where some stuff just has to go, because my brain can't keep it all.
When you think about this think street thing, I like this element because it's very grounding in the overall view of jiu-jitsu. And I posed a similar question to Chris, and I'm curious what you have to say about it. When you, let's focus, zone in just on think street.
Okay.
What are the musts?
Well, I mean, I would have to show you, not tell you. It's often one of those things where, can I verbally describe a painting? Sort of, but not really. I have to show you the painting. But can I paint what the song sounds like? Not really. You have to hear it, right? But, and it is one of those things that you have to feel. You can't even really learn it watching it on a screen. You have to feel it. But to do the best I can, it's, when you're grappling, you must always be strike aware. Mm-hmm. And in the early days, like I remember I'd be rolling with one of my Brazilian coach mentors. And if I was in a bad spot and stalling, they would start slapping me. Like I remember once I rolled over into turtle, and I was kind of like balling up the way judo guys do. And Rickson gave me two backhand slaps. And
you moved.
I moved. And
yep.
I turned over into guard. And you realize how in grappling rules only, it's fine to be in a turtle. But when you add strikes, the guard is superior.
Right.
And these are things that you miss if you do grappling only. So my first rule, when you say you think a street, is always assume that they're going to punch me.
Yeah.
So like, even like I've often had sport matches where my hand is raised and I thought I might have lost that if it was a real fight, or they're raising his hand because he got an advantage or whatever, and I spent 3/4 of the match top half guard punishing him, that I knew I won in the street. And that's where the sport can give you illusions of skill that you don't necessarily have. And MMA is filled with, no, I shouldn't say filled, but there's a lot of guys who have been multiple IBJJF world champions who have put their toes in the water in MMA and have not done very well.
Yeah.
Because it's a different game. Yeah. And MMA is the most applicable for the street. Even though us jiu-jitsu guys love to say it's not. Really it is. Really it fucking is. But it is engineered for the young athlete. It's a game for the young athlete. So for the older guy, pure jiu-jitsu is probably more practical in the street. Because not only are you don't have those athletics, but the cloth grips change everything.
Right.
And MMA has no cloth grips. So that's another aspect of it. But so when I teach my guys, I always do what they did to me is when they're in spots, I slap them. I slap them in the face a lot. And they can't hit me back. They have to come up with a jiu-jitsu solution to a striking problem. So they don't get to counter my strikes with the strikes of their own. Feels like, oh, that's fucking not fair. You're the black belt. Why do you get a punch and I don't? Because I'm trying to teach you.
Because you're not going to learn. You're just going to punch.
I'm trying to give you a jiu-jitsu solution, not an MMA solution. And that's where those two start to separate. And sometimes when I'm rolling, I'll have my guys, I'll go ahead and slap me if you can. So I'll try to realize, I'm getting too comfortable in this spot here. I need to go back to the basics, get my face out of the fucking fight.
Yep.
And that's kind of like how I in essence. So again, I'm not necessarily training street, but by thinking street, it alters how I do my sport and art.
Well, I think this is such. I mean, what soapbox do I have to stand on, right? Because I'm just an enthusiast who loves this, and I've been doing this for 5 years. But I feel like my initial perceptions of jiu-jitsu when I started to train it, and I come from an athletic background, right? So I would be more in the bucket of the CrossFitter dude who happens to be doing jiu-jitsu.
Yep.
I made a lot of what I thought was progress in the beginning that was purely the result of strength. It was not the result of skill acquisition.
I know the feeling.
Then I got to a point where I started to go, whoa, this is the secret sauce.
You hit a wall.
I would be like, anyone who's up against this is going to get throttled. So I just started to see, despite being a fan of MMA and UFC, I started to see jiu-jitsu as this pedestal thing that was untouchable.
Yeah.
Then, as I kept going, I realized that that's not, goes back to the very beginning of our conversation, right? When you learn more, you realize how little you know.
Yes.
And I got to a point where I went, wow, this really isn't the secret sauce anymore. It was one day, back when you were learning it in Redondo, but now too many people know too much. It is an element of defense, but if you get struck, that changes everything.
Yeah.
And I had one of our brown belts did exactly what you said. He said, "Hey, we're going to do a round where if I can slap you, I'm going to slap you." And in my head, I went, "Okay, that's because I'm still thinking jiu-jitsu is untouchable."
Yeah.
10 seconds into that round, my whole world shattered in terms of what I thought was possible on the mat.
Yeah.
And I went, holy shit, this is useless.
If
I don't start to change the position.
You almost get a false sense of
totally
security. Yep.
And then you put that false sense, and this is why I keep going back to this thing you're talking about. It is really important to think about these three elements, because then you take that false sense of security and you go, I'm unsure about this. I need to test it. So you go test it in a tournament. But a tournament has rules.
Yes.
And any other situation doesn't.
Yes.
You can, similarly do this with a plastic knife or a plastic gun on the mat away from you.
Yeah.
It changes the way, it changes the intensity, it changes the position, and you realize distance, clinch, and close guard do more for you than anything else. More than spider guard, more than worm guard, more than buggy
all
chokes,
that
more than
stuff is pure sport. Yep. And I love all that stuff. I think it's cool too.
Super fun.
And without that, like a lot of stuff, one of the things that the sport does when you're doing sport and art being research development, and the sport, here's the environment. Let's select and evolve, is you get to do things that you would never have done if you were allowing strikes.
Right.
There are certain guard techniques that would have never evolved if you allowed strikes. Here's a perfect example. So Greco and Judo are the art of the upright throw. You can't grab legs. You don't
So you mean like
grapple.
around the waist, up,
Yes,
like suplex, stuff like that?
that's
Yeah.
but Greco, the art of no cloth upright throw. Judo is the cloth art of the upright throw. And because you aren't allowed double legs, single legs, and all that, bending over really low and looking on ankle pick is no longer used. So you're forced to fight upright. So I have an easier time transitioning a judo or Greco guy to MMA than I do a pure wrestler or a jiu-jitsu guy, because you'll fight how you train. And the
Right.
jiu-jitsu wrestlers are used to this bending over and leading with your head, because you're allowed to lead with your head because no one's punching me in the face.
Right. That's how you catch a knee.
Right. And so there are things, and you can't think yourself into better skills. You have to train yourself into that.
Right.
You can't say, yeah, I do this, but if I was in a real fight, I wouldn't. No, you have to train it. And so, what was I saying? What was my point in this?
Well, you were talking about the change in positions between judo and Greco-Roman, like the fact that if you're upright,
Oh,
right, and
yes.
you're training upright.
So in each of these sports, you also get things that are created and developed because you can't grab the ankles or shoot the double leg, because you can't punch in the face. These new guards all develop, and sometimes elements of them become useful again in MMA or the street that you would have never gotten had you just always kept the rules of striking. You would have never gotten to an open guard at all if you're allowed to punch him in the nuts. It just would have never happened.
Right.
So just by creating rules, we create different tweaks and mutations, and some of the mutations are good. Some of them we realize this is a beneficial mutation. Let's carry this over into IBJJF rules. Let's carry this over into Greco rules. Let's carry it over into amateur MMA rules. Let's carry it over to professional. And you would have never found these without the isolation of that particular gene pool.
Right. I think, man, see, I love these conversations because I talk to one person, I feel one way, and then I talk to someone else, and you have nuanced perspectives, and I'm like, oh, okay. It kind of makes me feel better about training all the different elements, like
Yeah.
to consider the street, to ground you in reality, but practice the art so that you're
Yes.
being creative and open,
Yeah.
and then compete so
Yeah.
that you're not
You can feel
living in
real.
between these
Yeah.
places.
Because, yes, that's why I say you think street, you train the sport, because you have to train the vehicle, which is your body.
Yeah.
You can't
Totally.
neglect that. Too many guys who do street and art only have a minute and a half of fucking cardio and they're done. Or whatever it is, right? You have to train sport. And if you want to develop and grow, you have to practice. You don't master it, you practice the art. You are continually learning, continually researching, the developing, and finding a little bit more efficient way to accomplish what you think you already know.
On the topic of continually learning, I would like to briefly touch on astronomy and
Oh,
space, as I
let's
know
do it.
you have an interest.
Yeah.
What has staring into the universe taught you about life and jujitsu?
Oh, geez. Well, I mean, now we're going into a big topic, and this will be my final answer because I must run.
Yes.
So the way I've developed myself over the years, and the times where I've found myself, see, we think happiness is the goal. We are hardwired genetically to seek pleasure and avoid pain. Happiness is an illusory thing. It's something that you only experience in small moments. And when you think that life should be a constant orgasm, you're headed for pain, because that's not what life is. And our world gets really small when we're self seeking. So the first thing I try to do astronomically is I try to look at big history before I look at any other history. And by big history, I mean 14 billion years ago, 13.8 at the moment of the expansion of the universe, right? I want to look at big history first. I want to project forward when all the stars have burned out, drifted far enough apart, and there's nothing left. That makes me realize that no matter how much I think something is permanent, it is not. Everything is but transitory, and everything is relative. And my life on the planet Earth, from the earliest life to when it extinguishes, when the sun swallows up our Earth, that is a transitory tiny time in universal big time. Then we're going again and cutting it down, and going again and cutting it down. And humans, including myself, even people who think about it, even mathematicians who dwell on it, we have a hard time conceptualizing big numbers and small numbers, big objects and small objects. When you just realize the distance the Earth is from the sun, and realize how
untenable.
fucking huge it is, then realize
It's so
how far apart our sun is from the nearest fucking star. And
I know.
if you made these
It's
things,
overwhelming.
it's overwhelming. And
It's
if you made
overwhelming.
them, if you made the sun, and I can't remember the exact thing, the size of a baseball, the Earth is like the size of a pea.
Yeah.
They're like separated by 40 feet, whatever it is, and then to the closest next star, it's like miles away, right? I mean, it is such a vast thing. So it grounds me, it humbles me, it puts me in a place where, what the fuck am I doing worrying about whether I got the armbar last night or not?
Chris.
The stakes couldn't
Yeah.
be so low.
Yeah.
I make jokes because when I teach, I consider myself to be a comic too. And, in an age of climate change, political unrest, the dawn of AI, and the reemerging threat of global nuclear war, whether I show you my secret armbar or not, the stakes couldn't be so low. Who in
Oh,
the fuck cares, right?
yeah.
So that's where astronomy grounds me. It gives
Yeah.
me what so many astronomers before, and scientists, whether it's Penrose, Carl Sagan, Neil deGrasse Tyson, any of them, it gives me a sense of such awe and wonder.
Yeah.
It lets me double back to myself and watch myself think about things. Watch my little mammalian brain, my tiny little brain on this tiny little planet, in this tiny little solar system, in a tiny galaxy with billions of galaxies. I just
I
don't
love
feel
it.
like, how do you feel important? How do
What
I,
do you what do you think? I just got to ask. What do you think the universe is expanding into? This fucks me up. I think about this all the time. It
oh, I
makes me
know.
feel really worthless and scared. It
Well,
makes me feel anxiety.
it's totally, it's an anxiety that all of our biology says to fucking deny.
Yeah.
Deny it. Don't look
Don't
there.
don't feel it.
Don't
Don't
look there.
ask it. Yeah.
So, what was your existence like before you were born?
Dude, I think of this. So in meditation, there's this there's these things called koans, which are
Yeah.
like arbitrary questions you ask, like how
Japanese
does the
koans. Yep.
handle of a broom feel, whatever. And there's
Yes.
one of them. It's a very old one that says, what was your original face before even your parents were born? You just say that and then you meditate for however long. And I think about this all the time, and I go, what was I before them, or
Yeah.
what was it, the sensation of being unborn? And when you
Yeah.
think about that, it feels like when I'm asleep, or it's
Yeah.
very eerie to think about. It's very
Very
surreal,
fucking eerie. Very
but
eerie.
it happened. It happened to you, and it happened to me. There is
Yes.
that moment where there was not yet.
Yes. It's absolutely frightening. Like,
Terrifying.
I have children, and
Mm-hmm.
when you have children, your perspective also changes. I thought I knew what it would be like when I had kids until I had them, where
Yeah,
suddenly you realize before they're born that you have literally no idea what they're going to be like.
at all.
And how our brains, our pattern recognition machines, are always trying to predict and think that we'll know. And
Right.
you are suddenly faced with that thing that I absolutely cannot predict this
Yeah.
in any way, shape, or form. I could set the environment up the best I can, but even then, I have no control. And so, for myself, when I realize that my life is but a blink of an eye, that our son's life is but a blink of an eye in the grander scheme of things. If I could honestly reflect, I understand the need for religion. I
Mm-hmm.
understand people's needs to reject religion. I understand the need for a sense of community. I understand the value of individual relationships, these fleeting experiences. I understand that to be depressed about it is as absurd as to seek pleasure all the time. And that's kind of where I try to stay, in that place.
Right
And
in the
if I'm
middle.
starting to get resentful or pissed off, I have to laugh at myself, how absurd I'm being.
But you didn't answer my question.
Oh,
What do you think it is expanding into? Just your undoctored scientific thoughts on it.
I
Just out of curiosity.
I think because of the way our meat computers are, because we cannot envision in infinity and we cannot imagine nothingness. Those are two things that no matter how hard you try,
Yeah, you're not going to come to a conclusion.
you cannot, with our meat computers, grasp the concept of infinity or absolute nothingness.
Right.
So when I realized that I can't, and I've spent my life trying to imagine infinity and nothingness ever since I was a little kid,
I
I've
share the
tried to.
same anxiety.
And that causes anxiety, yes.
It does. No, it really does.
My son, like the minute right when he was about 5 or 6, him and he would like talk about it, and I would see him get anxietous.
Yeah.
Like, Dad, infinity. What if you had 10 infinities? And we would run over the concept, and I'd say, well,
Right.
infinity is a concept. We'd go over all that. And I would be sitting there having anxiety with him.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the answer is, but I feel like what happens is when you think from that perspective, you definitely don't know what the right choice is, but you can see all the wrong choices. That becomes
Yeah.
very clear. And it's almost ping-ponging you off into the correct direction, because to go these other ways is obviously incorrect. So I
Yeah.
cannot predict the future, but I can definitely predict some bad choices along the way. And that is
Well, it's
similar to the jujitsu.
yeah, it's good food for thought. It's
Yeah.
yeah, I share a lot of those sentiments. I know that you have to get going here, so I want to say unbelievable conversation. Thank you so much, Chris. It's been really fun to chat about everything from philosophy to astrology to jiu-jitsu
Yep.
and street fighting.
I'm
Um,
honored. I'm honored.
yeah,
Not astrology, astronomy, but
astronomy.
yeah.
Man, now I can't even talk.
I
Astronomy,
no, I get that.
astronomy.
I've made those errors before, and then I realized, fuck, I just called it astrology. Astrology is fucking hokey crystal bullshit.
But hey, neither of them matter in the
But
grand scheme, right?
yes, neither of them
Neither of them
matter. And for all we know, maybe there's a higher dimensional being channeling something, and they have the correct answer.
I hope that that's actually what's going on. I
God,
really
I
do.
hope so.
I would, to find that out, I'd be like, oh, cool. Pressure's off. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
We're going to wrap up here, and we'll do this again in the future, Chris.
Absolutely, sir.